The first raindrops hit the lake just as the sun disappeared behind a jagged line of clouds. The wind whispered across the water, carrying something darker than the night, a tension that made the hairs on my neck stand up. Across the horizon, the old wooden bridge I had spent years building trembled under the storm's weight, its planks groaning like a warning. I had poured everything into that bridge. $1.8 million worth of sweat, planning, and pride. It was more than wood and steel. It was my sanctuary, my claim to peace in a world that rarely gave a man his due. But someone thought they could erase that with a few signatures, a stamped letter, and a smug sense of entitlement. The HOA. And at the center of it all, Karen. Her farmhouse complex loomed over the hills, a fortress of perfection and control. She didn't see my bridge as a structure, or my lake as a piece of nature. To her, it was an obstacle to her illusion of order, a blemish she needed gone. And just like that, with the arrogance only power can buy, she sent crews to tear it down. Not a warning, not a discussion, just destruction. I watched it happen from the shadows. Each plank that splintered, each beam that fell, felt like a violation. The lake lapped at the remnants, indifferent to human battles. And then the anger took hold. Not the fleeting kind, the kind that simmers and sharpens until it becomes a plan. I didn't move yet. I let her think she had won. Let her believe that her authority, her badges of approval, her so-called law, had silenced me. But in the silence, I was plotting. By nightfall, the wind had changed direction. The water in my lake swelled, not just from rain, but from potential. And I knew deep down she had no idea what was coming. The power she abused, the little games she played, were about to meet a force she couldn't control. A quiet, calculated justice, as relentless as the water itself. And when she called the cops, the cops she sent were anything but official. Fake badges, fake authority, fake intimidation. But none of that could mask the truth. She had underestimated me, underestimated the storm I carried inside. Hit subscribe, watch till the end. Because what happens next isn't just revenge, it's a lesson. And once the water rises, there's no turning back. The lake had always been mine. Hidden behind thick pines and rolling hills, it shimmered under the sun like a secret the world wasn't meant to know. I had built that bridge myself, piece by piece, every nail and beam a testament to years of planning, labor, and pride. It wasn't just wood and steel, it was a symbol of ownership, freedom, and the quiet victories of a man who had fought too long to let anyone tell him what he could or couldn't do on his own land. But the HOA didn't care about symbols. They saw lines on a map, rules printed in bold, and an opportunity to assert control. At the center of it all was Karen, the kind of woman whose smile promised civility while her mind schemed. To her, the bridge was an eyesore, a disruption to her perfect estate. And in one swift decision she ordered it demolished. No discussion, no warning. Just machines rolling in, tearing apart what I had spent a fortune and a lifetime building. I watched from the treeline, feeling every splinter as if it were driven into my own skin. The sound of wood snapping against steel echoed across the water, a violent symphony of injustice. My anger didn't flare. It settled, heavy and deliberate, the kind that waits, calculates, and strikes with precision. Her farmhouse complex rose in the distance like a marble throne. Expansive fields, manicured lawns, gates that clicked shut at the touch of a button. It was the empire of control, and she was the queen. She had resources, influence, and the kind of arrogance that made people underestimate the quiet ones, the ones who let storms build before they hit. By nightfall, the lake reflected the moon like a mirror to my thoughts. Every ripple whispered possibilities. I didn't need to act yet. The world believed power came from badges, letters, and authority. But power, real power, could also come from patience, strategy, and the unyielding determination of a man who had nothing left to lose. In the dark, I traced the outline of the bridge one last time, committing it to memory. The water lapped against the shore, indifferent yet ready to serve as my ally. And somewhere inside me, a plan was already taking shape, one that Karen could neither imagine nor control. The stage was set. The players were in place. And the lake was about to become more than a sanctuary. It was about to become a reckoning. The days after the bridge demolition were heavier than any storm. The lake sat like a wound, the water restless, reflecting the jagged ruins of what had been mine. Each morning, I walked its edges, boots sinking into damp soil, eyes scanning the treeline as if the trees themselves were witnesses to a crime. The HOA had taken more than wood and steel. They had taken a sense of control, a piece of dignity, and left behind the audacity of their arrogance. Karen's farm complex loomed in the distance, pristine and untouchable. Every corner of her property screamed privilege. Automated sprinklers watering lawns with military precision, gates that sealed with electronic locks, and stone pathways that gleamed even in the dust of neglect elsewhere. From my vantage, I could see the people she employed, moving like clockwork under her orders. But she had underestimated one thing. Patience bred in fire is a weapon more dangerous than any badge or letter. I began small. Observing her routines, noting the paths the machinery took, the drainage systems that carried water away, and the hidden weak points of her seemingly perfect defenses. The wind became my messenger, carrying sound, scent, and whispers of change across the hills. And the lake, my lake, became more than water. It became a participant, a silent conspirator that could be harnessed, directed, and unleashed. Every night, I walked the edge of my ruined bridge, imagining the old wood reinforced with strategy instead of nails. I drew maps in the dirt, connecting pipes, channels, and natural slopes to the points I had observed on her land. The injustice had sparked more than anger. It had sparked ingenuity, a quiet reckoning forming like ice before a thaw. Then came the warnings. Karen noticed the patterns of observation, the faint signs of preparation. Watermarks near gates, small embankments shifted under my careful hands, subtle changes in drainage paths that no casual eye could detect. She sent men in, questioning the workers, scanning my property, trying to assert dominance. But each intrusion only confirmed what I already knew. Her control was fragile, built on assumptions and fear of confrontation, not strength. The lake responded in ways she could never imagine. Heavy rains, timed with the natural swell, filled channels I had discreetly dug. Minor floods that seemed accidental at first, water sneaking across low points, testing the land, testing her patience. And each time she called, fumed, or sent warnings, but they were empty gestures. She didn't know the pattern. She didn't know the rhythm. I wasn't acting in anger alone. I was executing a plan written in months of observation, frustration, and careful engineering. Every drop of water, every channel, every natural slope was part of a design, a silent statement that destruction cannot go unchallenged. And in the distance, the farmhouse remained untouchable in her mind, yet vulnerable in ways she had never calculated. As the tension built, so did my anticipation. Nights were spent plotting precise timings, observing weather patterns, and imagining the eventual search. The lake had become alive in my mind, a weapon forged by years of toil, insult, and disregard. Each day, Karen's audacity fed the strategy. Each night, the lake whispered its potential, urging patience. And then came the final prelude, a minor storm, enough to swell the lake beyond its bounds. Channels overflowed into low fields near her gates. Machinery stalled. Employees scrambled. The first taste of inconvenience had arrived, and with it, a glimmer of understanding that their authority was not absolute. Karen would soon discover that some forces are invisible until they strike, and when they do, no badge, no letter, no semblance of power can stop them. The stage was set for the reckoning. The water, the planning, and the injustice all converged. And in the dark, watching the moon glint off the restless lake, I knew the moment of payback was nearing. The HOA had demolished my bridge, but they had inadvertently built the instrument of their own vulnerability. And Karen, she would be the first to feel it. The morning of reckoning arrived under a sky heavy with storm clouds, low and oppressive like a warning. The lake had swelled quietly overnight, fed by both rain and the channels I had painstakingly carved into the earth. What seemed like an ordinary rise in water was, in truth, a deliberate orchestration, each ripple moving toward a singular purpose. Karen emerged from her farmhouse as usual, her posture rigid, surveying the property with the confidence of someone convinced of invulnerability. But the first signs of disruption had already begun. Water trickled past the edges of her manicured lawns, sneaking under gates, pooling where it shouldn't. At first, her employees dismissed it as a quirk of weather. But the flow grew, slow yet relentless, inching over boundaries she believed unbreachable. I watched from the shadows, heart steady, eyes sharp. Months of preparation, years of investment, every insult and act of destruction against me culminating in this precise moment. The lake was no longer passive. It was alive, surging with purpose, a quiet fury harnessed by patience and strategy. And Karen had no idea the force she was about to confront. The water crept into her fields, rising with terrifying inevitability. Crops began to bend and break beneath the pressure, machinery stalled in muddy soil, and her immaculate pathways vanished beneath a creeping tide. Panic spread among her employees, their movements frantic and uncoordinated, betraying the veneer of order that Karen had so carefully maintained. Then came her attempt to call authority, her so-called cops. They arrived, badges glinting under the dim morning light, but their confidence faltered as soon as they stepped into the flood. The water, cold and unyielding, revealed the limitations of paper and plastic authority. Karen's face contorted with disbelief. Her control was slipping through her fingers like the very water she had ignored for so long. I remained unseen, a phantom in the trees, watching the chaos unfold. The lake had done its work. The destruction of my bridge had been the catalyst, but the methodical, quiet power of nature, directed by careful planning, was the instrument of justice. Every wave, every surge, a reminder that arrogance and entitlement are no match for patience and precision. Hours passed. The flood consumed the lowlands of her empire, her farmhouse perched on higher ground yet no longer untouchable. The panic in her eyes was matched only by the disbelief in those who had supported her orders. Commands were shouted, futile attempts at containment made, but the water obeyed no one. It moved according to its own laws, which I had learned to read, to guide, and to wield. By late afternoon, the lake had reclaimed its dominance. Machinery lay overturned, pathways were gone, and the manicured fields were submerged under a merciless tide. Karen stood at the edge of her property, powerless, watching the consequences of her hubris unfold. The fake cops, hired to intimidate, had no authority in this flood. Nature, and the hand that guided it, had rendered them irrelevant. I stepped forward at last, but only enough to let her see the calm in my eyes, the satisfaction in knowing that every calculation had succeeded. No words were spoken, none were needed. The message was clear: underestimate the quiet ones, destroy what is sacred to them, and face consequences you cannot control. The storm clouds began to break, sunlight filtering through like an ironic spotlight on the chaos. The lake receded slowly, but the impact remained: fields ruined, machinery destroyed, and Karen's authority irreparably shaken. Justice, patient and deliberate, had arrived not with a roar, but with the relentless, unstoppable flow of water and precision. And in that silence, the truth was undeniable. Power taken lightly can be undone quietly, yet completely. The bridge was gone, but in its place, a reckoning had been built, a lesson in patience, strategy, and the consequences of underestimating those you deem weaker. The water finally began to recede, leaving behind a landscape transformed by both nature and consequence. Where Karen's pristine fields had once stood, mud and debris now stretched like a silent testament to arrogance undone. The machinery she had relied on lay in ruin, powerless against the force she had ignored. And yet, even in the aftermath, the lake shimmered quietly, almost indifferent, as if it had only done what it was meant to do. Karen stood at the edge of her remaining land, her empire fractured, authority stripped bare. There were no words to convey the lesson she had just received. No lectures, no apologies, no excuses could undo the precision of justice she had provoked. Every decision she had made to assert control, every act of destruction toward my bridge, had led her here. And now, she could only watch as the consequences unfolded, undeniable and absolute. For me, the aftermath was not about vengeance alone. It was about balance. The bridge had been destroyed, yes, but the principle remained intact. Respect is earned, not demanded, and power wielded without wisdom invites consequences. Walking along the restored edges of my lake, I could see the quiet proof of that truth in the mud, the broken machinery, the flooded fields, and even in the faint echo of Karen's disbelief. The HOA had learned, though not in words, that authority is fragile. Structures built on arrogance crumble when tested against patience, planning, and the natural order. My lake, once just a sanctuary, had become both shield and instrument, a reminder that careful, deliberate action can reclaim what was unjustly taken. And yet there was also a strange clarity in it all. The destruction, though dramatic, had illuminated something deeper. Justice is rarely loud or immediate. Sometimes it rises quietly, flows steadily, and leaves its mark in ways impossible to ignore. Karen's complex, her carefully curated control, had been undone not by force alone, but by foresight, strategy, and the patience to wait for the perfect moment. As the sun set behind the hills, painting the water in shades of gold and blood red, the lesson settled into place. No one is untouchable, no authority absolute. Respect, patience, and strategy outweigh raw power. And while the bridge was gone, its spirit, its meaning, had been restored tenfold through action, impact, and consequence. The lake, now calm, reflected not just the sky above, but the quiet justice beneath. And in that reflection, a question lingered, unspoken yet clear. How often do we underestimate the quiet ones, until it's too late?